There is a specific kind of frustration that I think you might recognize. You have been eating less. You have been moving more. You have lost weight in your face, your arms, maybe even your legs. But the belly just sits there, unchanged, unmoved, like it did not get the memo that you are trying to lose weight. And the worst part is not even how it looks. The worst part is that feeling of doing everything right and watching every other part of your body respond except the one part you care about most. If that is where you are right now, I need you to hear something important before we go any further. The reason your belly fat is not responding is not because you are doing something wrong in general. It is because belly fat, specifically the deep kind, operates by a completely different set of biological rules than the fat everywhere else on your body. And once you understand those rules, everything changes. This is the Vitality Code, where we translate real research into strategies you can actually use. If you want more content like this, hit that like button and subscribe right now because we release new videos every single week and every one of them is built around giving you something genuinely useful. Now, let us get into this because what I am about to share comes directly from research that most mainstream fitness content never touches. The first thing we need to establish is why belly fat behaves differently. And this starts with understanding that not all fat in your body is the same tissue doing the same thing. The fat you can pinch on your stomach, the soft layer just under the skin, is called subcutaneous fat. It is relatively passive. It stores energy. It responds reasonably well to calorie deficits and general exercise over time. But underneath that layer, packed around your organs, sits a completely different type of fat called visceral fat. And visceral fat is not passive storage. It is metabolically active tissue that produces hormones, releases inflammatory chemicals, and communicates directly with your liver, your pancreas, and your brain in ways that influence your entire metabolic system. Here is what most people do not realize. Visceral fat has a significantly higher concentration of cortisol receptors than any other fat depot in your body. This means it is exquisitely sensitive to your stress hormone. And it is this cortisol connection that explains why so many people lose fat everywhere except their belly, especially when they are dieting hard, training hard, and living stressful lives all at the same time. Think about what aggressive dieting and intense exercise do to your cortisol. They raise it significantly. Chronic calorie restriction is interpreted by your body as a biological stressor. Hard training sessions spike cortisol during and after the workout. A busy, demanding life keeps cortisol elevated throughout the day. And all of that cortisol is being received by the visceral fat around your organs through those cortisol receptors, which are essentially giving your belly fat a continuous signal to hold on and potentially grow even as you lose fat elsewhere. This is not theory. Research published in the journal Obesity has confirmed that chronically elevated cortisol is independently and directly associated with visceral fat accumulation, regardless of total calorie intake. You can be in a deficit and still be telling your belly fat to stay through the cortisol signal. And until you address that signal, the belly is going to keep ignoring everything else you do. But here is where things get interesting. Because cortisol is not the only hormonal driver of stubborn belly fat, there is another hormone that most people in the fitness space barely mention, and it might be even more important for understanding why visceral fat specifically is so resistant. That hormone is insulin. Every time you eat carbohydrates, particularly refined carbohydrates and sugar, your blood glucose rises and your pancreas releases insulin to bring it back down. Insulin is a storage hormone. Its job is to take glucose out of your bloodstream and either deliver it to your muscles for fuel or convert it to fat for storage. And here is the critical piece. Visceral fat cells are significantly more insulin sensitive than subcutaneous fat cells, meaning they respond more aggressively to insulin signals. When insulin is chronically elevated through frequent high carbohydrate eating, visceral fat receives the strongest storage signal of any fat depot in your body. It accumulates preferentially. And it resists release because fat breakdown, which scientists call lipolysis, is directly suppressed by insulin. You cannot burn fat efficiently when insulin is high. And if your eating pattern keeps insulin elevated for most of the day, your visceral fat is in a near-permanent storage mode regardless of your overall calorie intake. The surprising part is what happens when you address both of these hormonal drivers simultaneously. When cortisol comes down and insulin is managed through specific dietary and lifestyle choices, visceral fat becomes dramatically more responsive than most people expect. Research has consistently shown that visceral fat is actually more metabolically active and more responsive to the right interventions than subcutaneous fat. It accumulated faster under the wrong hormonal conditions, and it releases faster under the right ones. The people who struggle most with belly fat for the longest time are usually the ones doing the right things for fat loss in general, but the wrong things for visceral fat specifically. And the difference comes down to understanding those specific hormonal levers. So, what are the actual strategies that the research supports for targeting visceral fat? The first and most evidence-backed intervention is a specific type of exercise that most people are either not doing or not doing correctly. Zone 2 aerobic training. This is moderate-intensity cardiovascular exercise where your heart rate sits at approximately 60 to 70% of its maximum, a pace where you can speak in sentences but would not want to have a long conversation. Walking at a brisk pace, cycling at a comfortable effort, swimming at a moderate speed. Research from multiple institutions, including Harvard Medical School, has found that consistent Zone 2 training is uniquely effective at reducing visceral fat, more so than high-intensity training alone, because it specifically promotes fat oxidation as the primary fuel source during the session, while also lowering cortisol rather than raising it. That second point is critical. Zone 2 exercise lowers cortisol. High-intensity exercise, while enormously valuable for other reasons, raises cortisol. For someone with stubborn visceral fat driven by chronic cortisol elevation, doing exclusively high-intensity training may be actively working against their primary goal. That is not even the most important part. Because the dietary strategy that research most consistently links to visceral fat reduction is not what most people expect. It is not simply eating less. It is specifically reducing refined carbohydrates and added sugar while maintaining or increasing protein intake. A study from the University of Alabama found that participants who reduced their refined carbohydrate intake while keeping total calories the same lost significantly more visceral fat over 12 weeks than participants who reduced dietary fat by the same caloric amount. Same calories. Different macronutrient composition. Dramatically different visceral fat outcomes. The mechanism runs directly through insulin. Lower refined carbohydrate intake means lower and less frequent insulin spikes, which means visceral fat cells spend more time in a hormonal environment that allows fat release rather than promoting fat storage. Replacing refined carbohydrates with protein and fiber-rich vegetables keeps you full, keeps blood sugar stable, and keeps insulin in the range where your visceral fat can actually respond to the deficit you are creating. Now, let me give you the third piece of this puzzle, and it is the one that most fitness content completely ignores because it does not involve food or exercise at all. Sleep. Specifically, sleep duration and quality as a direct intervention for visceral fat. A study that followed over 1,000 adults over 5 years found that people who consistently slept 5 hours or fewer per night accumulated significantly more visceral fat over the study period than people who slept 6 to 7 hours, even when controlling for diet and exercise. The mechanisms are multiple and interconnected. Short sleep elevates cortisol. It increases ghrelin, the hunger hormone, driving intake of high-calorie foods. It reduces growth hormone production, which normally promotes fat metabolism overnight, and it impairs insulin sensitivity the following day, making every meal you eat more likely to be stored as fat rather than used for fuel. Fixing your sleep does not just make you feel better. It changes the hormonal environment in which your belly fat exists. And for many people with stubborn visceral fat, sleep is the intervention that finally makes everything else work. What happened next when researchers combined all three of these approaches, Zone 2 exercise, reduced refined carbohydrates with higher protein, and optimized sleep, produced results that genuinely impressed the scientists studying them. Participants lost visceral fat at rates significantly higher than any single intervention produced alone, and they did it without extreme calorie restriction, without punishing training schedules, without supplements. Just 3 targeted lifestyle changes applied consistently over 12 weeks. The compounding effect of addressing cortisol through exercise type and sleep, and insulin through dietary composition, created a hormonal environment where visceral fat had no biological reason to stay and every biological reason to go. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these 3 strategies you think is going to be the hardest for you to implement. Is it the Zone 2 training, the refined carbohydrate reduction, or the sleep? I genuinely read every comment and your answers shape what I cover next. And if you know someone who has been struggling with belly fat despite doing everything else right, share this video with them today. Because the answer was never more effort. It was the right effort, aimed at the right biological targets. Belly fat is not stubborn because your body is broken. It is stubborn because it is responding to signals you may not have known you were sending. Change the signals, and watch the belly finally start to change.